let's take a look at Netzach ShebeMalchut tonight. So we've already looked at a couple of steps within Malchus, and we've also, of course, extensively seen different aspects of Middot Netzach. I think that Netzach ShebeMalchut is a little bit more of an intuitive component of Malchus, in that we talk about it every single day, that Kadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus is eternal. Malchus chamalchus kol olamim u'mshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. We have this notion that Hashem is not a melech for the moment, right? He's not a temporary elect. Hashem's Malchus is something which is kayim la'ad u'l'olmei olamim, and that the fact that there even is a universe itself is expressive of Kadosh Baruch Hu's eternal Malchus. It's not, even that's not a temporary thing. It's descriptive as far as we can describe it. It speaks of an eternal state. Of if Hashem is going to create a world, He's the Melech of the world. That concept is not foreign to us, that Hashem's Malchus should be eternal. We actually find, we've referenced numerous times the Pesach of Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. That's introduced in the context of discussing the Malchus of Yisrael. So the whole discussion over there is whether Shaul's Malchus is going to be HaYom eternally or not, or if it's being torn away from somebody else. And it's in that context that Hashem asserts himself as the Netzach Yisrael. So we kind of have that understanding of Netzach ShebeMalchut. We understand that Hashem's Malchus is something which is itself endless and eternal and always will conquer. That we say, Bayom Hahu, Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. That La'asid Lavo, Hashem's name, His recognition in the world, will have that achdus, will reach its conclusion. It's not going to lose the battle. It's the nitzachon will be complete. And we have this concept that comes up in Mishlei about Rabot Machshavot Belevish V'atzat Adonai Hitakum. That people plan, man placht and Gott lacht, they say, the Yiddish saying, man plans and God laughs. That Shlomo Melech speaks out how people have all sorts of plans, but ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for the universe is the sustaining plan. The world order that Hashem anticipates and has projected for the world is what's going to come to fruition, however it ends up happening. And the Middot actually ties this pasuk of Atzat Hashem Hitakum into Malchus Yisrael, interestingly enough. That Rabbi Yossi Galili says, what's pshat in the pasuk, Rabot Machshavot B'Levish? Who is Shlomo Melech talking about? So it gives two different examples, but it says Shlomo Melech was talking about Avshalom, who tried to usurp the Malchut. He thought in his heart the saying, Im horeg ani David avi, if I'll kill off David, ani no tel hamelucha l'nafshi, I'll take the Malchus for myself. He didn't realize Hashem was one step ahead. He thought this whole story out a couple steps ahead of Shalom. So we see that Hashem's planning is the Malchus of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. As we've been seeing that Kabbalistically, the Malchus of Hashem is the very fact that there is a revelation of Hashem's will as a universe, as a physical world that we can connect to and relate with. That ultimately is going to follow Hashem's plan for its success, by virtue of the fact that it's here. In other words, if we can tie it into the whole idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being Borei Olamot U'Machrivan, the world that we find ourselves in as a successful world, if we're here and we can reflect on Hashem as creator, we're obviously in a world that achieves the success that it's meant to, otherwise we wouldn't be in that type of world. It would have been one of those worlds that's been destroyed, which really is subject probably for another time that we could explore. And this is the idea of Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed. But I think that another component of Netzach ShebeMalchut, as far as it's expressed in Hashem's Hanhaga, is the concept that Melucha itself, as a human quality, as something which is expressed in human society, itself is expressive of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus. So in other words, we find this concept throughout Chazal, that the Leiv Malachim B'Yad Hashem, that the hearts of kings are in the hands of God, that the greatest agents of human activity in this world themselves are tools through which Hashem's Malchus itself is expressed. So Shlomo Melech says it, Palgei Mayim Leiv Melech B'Yad Adonai, Al Kol Asher Yachpotz Yatenu, that like streams of water are the hearts of kings in the hands of God. Wherever He wishes, He directs them towards that path. And this is the idea that the Rishonim speak out, that ultimately Hashem does exercise the ability to limit certain individuals' bechira in order to allow the process of creation to take the necessary steps forward. And when you have these major players like Malachim, so those are king pieces on the stage, they require manipulation. But as a result of that, the manipulation is not really the essence for this midah. I think the point is that highest scale level of description of human society, which is what a melech is, the expression of the rishus of human societies and aggregates of people that have organized around an ideal, a sense of self, an identity, themselves are expressive of how Hashem's malchus comes into expression in the world. And therefore, the things that the melech does are things that Hashem does. In other words, that's why Hashem's utilizing them, because they are the kind of the macro level descriptions of how Hashem's will is being manifest in the world. So of course what they're doing is going to be manifesting what Hashem wants to be happening in the world. That's where it's going to be taking place. In another way that we find this in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hanhaga is the idea of tzadikim gozer v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. That a tzaddik has the capacity to effectuate Hashem's will in the world on a higher order level than a standard individual might be expressing that. Because somebody who kind of has the midah of Yesod and is the embodiment of Hashem's or in creation, and in that place has that leadership quality, is somebody who is going to be expressing Hashem, the totality of Hashem's ratzon in the world. Memela, they're going to be the actors of Hashem's will, how it's manifesting in the world. So I think that we have this idea then that when a person is in a leadership position, first of all, a couple of things. When a person is in a leadership position and they're representing the klal, I think one of the things that demands of them is to have the macro vision in mind at all times. And that a person in a position of malchut or rishut, for whatever reason they end up in that position, needs to know how to translate the macro vision into the micro units of his malchut, of his memshala. So that in the same way that we saw in previous Middot within Malchut, that Gvura ShebeMalchut demanded that the Melech pays attention to the individual, cares for the life of the individual. And Sefirat said that he needs to allow the harmonization and the synchronicity of the details within his memshala. Netzach ShebeMalchut, I believe, one of the aspects of it tells us that a person in a position of Malchut needs to exercise their macro vision, the perspective that only they have, and empower the individuals within that system to act on behalf of the Malchut in a way which is endless. In other words, there will constantly be an innumerable number of roles which need to be filled within the Malchut. And it's only someone who has that broadest perspective who can be constantly fighting the fight even when everyone else thinks the battle is over. In other words, you finished on the front line, so everyone goes home. The Melech is the one person who's still having sleepless nights because they know that there's so much more to the picture. Because now that we're coming home from battle, let's say, just Lamashal, just to use that example, you've got all of these tens of thousands of soldiers who now need to integrate back into society, who now, you need to employ them. That all of these jobs that originally were being filled to be creating all of the artillery and all the equipment, now there's this massive vacancy. The king has this massive vision and understands that the job is never done. And because of that, they're able to constantly delegate individuals within their jurisdiction to continue the job for them and to empower individuals to take up the mantle of the nitzchiot which only the king is sensitive to. And I think this is possibly the pshat in an otherwise very vague, possibly Medrash Pliya over here, in the Medrash Rabbah in Koheles. The Medrash Rabbah, this is wild. So the Medrash Rabbah says as follows. It's the pasuk that describes David HaMelech. It says that he was a Nar Admoni, He was, Yefei Mar'eh and Vitov Ro'i. Yefei Einayim Vitov Ro'i. That he had beautiful eyes and was good looking. Vitov Ro'i. So says the Medrash Rabbah, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Vitov Ro'i Bahalacha. He was good looking in halacha. Meaning to say what? Shekol mi shehu ro'eh oto zocher et talmudo. Anyone who would look at David would remember all of his learning. What? Anyone who looks at David would remember all of his learning? But I think that the pshat in the Medrash is, maybe one understanding of the Medrash is, that only David, only the Melech, is somebody who maintains the entire macrospective vision of what this Malchus is all about. And it's only by thinking, okay, you think you know pshat, you think you figured out what the parsha is about, you look back at David and you see the halicha, you see the progress of the monarchy, you see the path that we're on, and you recognize that there's 20 steps ahead that the king is thinking about. They know the war is not over. They know the repercussions of winning this battle on this one front. They understand where everything fits in. And what the king, if a king is truly embodying the Middot of Malchus, what the king allows the nation to do is to tap into their own sense of nitzchiut by empowering individuals to have the perspective, the broad perspective that only the king has, to elevate people up to their high perch and to see broader than perhaps the individual was able to see on their own. This is part of the power of a melech. The nitzchiut of the melech is to draw individuals upwards into their elevated gaze, to see things from the vantage point that only the melech is able to have, and to empower individuals within their jurisdiction, within the space that the king himself represents. Draw them into that eternal battle, to the perseverance that the melech has, and to allow them a glimmer of what it means to be someone who embodies nitzchiut in that way, who has the breadth of vision that as a result of which that person is able to represent. And ultimately, it's such a melech, it's a person who has that breadth of vision, who is ultimately their own eitzah is mikayim, the atzat Hashem hitakum, which would be true, I think, even lahavdil on individual level. Someone who has a vision for a organization, for a community, for an endeavor. The person who has that breadth to realize that just because we accomplished one major ordeal, we pulled off a great dinner, we had a great opening night, that doesn't mean that you've made it. I actually, hopefully he never listens to this, but I have a friend who started a company, and very ambitious ordeal, extremely ambitious. A lot of money went into the founding of the idea, and it was, opening night was this massive celebrity dripping, type of event with the lights and the models and you name it, right? The champagne and the works, right? And I spoke to him a few months, literally probably 4 or 5 months afterwards, and I said, how's it going as far as the business? And he said, we're in the dumps. He's like, I don't, if my grandchildren are able to recover from the damage I've done, we'll be doing pretty well. And I was like, literally, how is that possible? Like, every single detail was paid so much attention to. The night's events were so well orchestrated. And I think that it's a pagam in Malchus. For a person to have all of the details of the local conditions worked out, but to have no breadth of vision, to understand, okay, where does this translate into as far as my sales go? As far as continuity of translating all of these people into customers, into buying into my story, into participating with me in the long haul, as far as investments go. Is this just a fun night for people to come out and, a night in the lights? Or is it part of something more? Are you drawing them into your vision? And I think that the Midah of Netzach ShebeMalchut tells us that a person in a leadership vision, in a leadership position, needs to elevate themselves beyond the local, beyond the minute that they find themselves within. And I just want to close with a beautiful quote I came across from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in an essay he wrote a couple of years back, where he writes a beautiful thing. I'll quote to you. He says, despair can be part of leadership itself. For when the prophet sees himself reviled, rebuked, criticized, as so many of our prophets were, when his words fall on stony ground, when he sees people listening to what they want to hear, not what they need to hear, that is when the last layers of self are burned away, leaving only the task, the mission, the call. When that happens, a new greatness is born. It is now no longer matters that the prophet is unpopular and unheeded. All that matters is the work and the one who has summoned him to it. That is when the prophet arrives at the truth stated by Rabbi Tarfon in Pirkei Avot, that it is not for you to complete the task, but neither are you free to stand aside from it. I think Rabbi Sachs is kind of bringing upon this notion that the king doesn't get kind of misdirected by popularity in the moment, or by how. And this is, by the way, this is one of the issues that Shaul had, that he was a person for the people, that he was swayed by the desires and the interests of the populace. And this is exactly the thing that Shmuel comes to him and tells him, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, my friend. I'm sorry, but if you want to have the melucha, you have to have the level of nitzchut, of eternal commitment to the values that we represent, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu has. Not to be swayed by the desires of the people, but to stand tall in a way that the people can look at you the way that they will with David, and immediately recall the journey and the details of the journey and everything that the path entails. That was the recollection of the Talmudo that people would have when they would see David HaMelech. They would be drawn immediately back into the halacha, not only into the details of Yisrael, but into the pathway of Yisrael, into the progress that Yisrael needs to make. And they never mistook a behavior of David for a person like Shaul. Shaul, who would be able to be swayed by the people, was unable to embody the Midah of Netzach ShebeMalchut, whereas a person like David, people would be able to look at and immediately recall the eternal mission and the journey that Yisrael has to embark upon. So these are some thoughts, I think, very practical ones for taking the Midah of Netzach ShebeMalchut and translating it into our lives.